Today we've got a great story of revenge on a guy that hopped out of a car intending to get physical. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, my act of petty revenge made them send me for a psych eval. I grew up in a pretty freaked up situation. I was diagnosed autistic at a young age. I was adopted and considered a defective product and abused consistently for being so dang weird. At 13, I was given some tests and put into special college courses. My mom beat me for thinking I was better than everyone, so I ran away from home at 14. By 16, I was caught and put into a group home. All the kids in my group home, there were several houses, 2 for boys and 1 for girls, all had to go to the same continuation school. The first day of class, the principal addressed our homeroom and said, "I am here to teach you to speak on complete sentences and use words that have more than 2 syllables." I can't tell you how much that ticked me off. I wanted to tell them to freak off. How could you just discount all these kids when you know nothing about them? Most of the kids in the class came from situations as bad as mine or worse. It doesn't make us stupid. However, I was just tired of having to constantly advocate for myself, so I said freak it, and decided to just act like a total airhead. For an entire quarter, I asked the dumbest questions I could think of in class. I made stupid mistakes. I even talked like an airhead instead of my natural, more autistic diction. Think Brennan from Bones. Honestly, it was fun, and so much less pressure than trying to excel academically. Ironically, it also made me more popular with the boys. Anyhow, one day we get a creative writing assignment and I was just really inspired. I wrote a parable about a boy who lived in the jungle and befriended an alligator. It was basically an allegory about toxic relationships. I was called into the principal's office for plagiarism. They couldn't believe that I wrote it and wanted to know where I stole it from. I told them they assumed I was an idiot, so I've been acting like one. If they cared to look at any of my transcripts, they would know I'm not an idiot. They were ticked and thought I was psycho, so the group home made me meet with a psychologist for a day of testing. He said I had an IQ of 152 and borderline personality disorder. Later, the diagnosis was changed to autism/ADHD with CPTSD. Anyhow, I got to be the first group home kid in Redding, California to go to the public school in 1992. Edit, you guys have been so kind to me. I want to add something to my story. Years later, I was in a group called Leadership Redding. We were at a team-building camping trip talking about our experiences with Redding. I talked about being the first group home kid to go to public school. I shared about the outrage, how one teacher even introduced me as the group home kid everyone has been upset about. One of the guys in the group was a police officer. He admitted to being one of the people who wrote letters of outrage to the local newspaper. It really changed his heart when he saw how I turned out all those years later. At the time, I was in a leadership role at age 26 at the very same newspaper that had hosted all those angry letters to the editor. I have learned if you walk your life with grace, integrity, and a determination to prove the freakers wrong, you can have an amazing life. It's so disappointing to hear stories like this and think about kids who are just in unfortunate situations, who ended up in a group home situation like this, just assumed to be these irredeemable students. I would like to say that I hope most places have advanced and are better than this now, but unfortunately, I think it kind of just comes down to how well-funded of an area you're in. I mean, I can just think of some places off the top of my head that I know if you find yourself in a situation like this, you might very well still be treated like that. Beautiful Phantom 1 commented, "Sorry you were treated that way. Glad you got your chance to show them you are way more than they could have dreamed. I hope you're living a great life." Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy awesome stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, got my college roommate to move out by watching adult content in front of her and her friend. This all took place when I, 31-year-old female, was a freshman in college. I went to a university out of state and was excited to be out on my own for the first time. There were different styles of dorms, and the older, more janky buildings were geared towards certain specific interests. For example, the dorm I chose to be in was the outdoor adventure dorm, for people who were into stuff like hiking, canoeing, climbing, outdoor adventure type stuff. So I thought it only fair to assume I was going to end up with a roommate who was also into fun adventure type stuff. Boy, was I wrong. On move-in day, I met her for the first time, as well as her mother, and both of them could easily be described as prim, prissy, and had a complete air of snobbery. The mother hated absolutely everything she saw and complained about everything loudly, even saying, "This room is smaller than my walk-in closet at home, and even it's too small." She also picked up a little figurine I'd set on my desk. A little Viking guy my mother had given me as a little "you've got this" type of thing, and called it a cheap piece of crap before letting it drop from her hand back onto the desk, and did that little finger flicky thing people do when they touch something dirty. But my roommate wasn't saying or doing much, and having a difficult family member myself, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe she was raised snobby but she's trying to break out and get into other things. Because I know I was eager to try new things myself now that I was away from home. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and within the first few weeks, she proved to be an absolutely horrible roommate. She would eat my food, smoke in our room, which I could have had to pay a large fine for, was super loud when I would be trying to sleep for my early morning classes, and a bunch of other things you could label as passive-aggressive or just downright rude and disrespectful. I did confront her about my issues with what she was doing, but she would always just shrug me off and say it wasn't a big deal. After a while, I had enough and started trying to find ways to make living with me more uncomfortable. It started with little things, such as running to the door and farting really bad when I heard her coming to the room, so she would walk into a cloud of stink. But the pièce de résistance came when she had a friend over one day, and I got a perfectly depraved idea. Our beds were parallel to each other against opposite walls. Standard setup for a shared single-room dorm, and I was sitting on my bed with my back to the wall with my laptop in my lap, and the other two were on my roommate's bed talking loudly and generally ignoring my presence. I had a pair of really nice skull candy headphones, the kind that when you crank them all the way up can practically be used as speakers, so even when I had them on, people could clearly hear whatever I was listening to unless the volume was turned way down. So I cranked the volume and pulled up the hub and found a random video of a very loud Asian woman getting railed, and her screaming and moaning was extremely audible through my headphones. I minimized the window so it was playing in the background, and I was just scrolling Facebook with a totally straight face. It took them a second to register what they were hearing, but as soon as they realized what it was, they became visibly uncomfortable. They tried to keep their conversation going, but after just a few minutes, they left to go to the friend's dorm instead. 3 days later, she told me she was moving out and getting an off-campus apartment with friends, and I had the room all to myself for the whole rest of the year, which was great because this all happened just 6 weeks after move-in, and I got to enjoy all the advantages of having a room to myself. I got a lot of fun stories out of my college days, but that will always be one of my favorites. They're just a bunch of prudes, letting a little background noise make them up and move out of the room. Honestly, if this was a tactic that actually worked a good majority of the time, I think a lot more people would be willing to try it to get a solo dorm. The worst part is when you try to pull this on a roommate you hope moves out and you hear from across the room, "Hey, can I also watch?" What do you do in that situation? Agreeable.1862 commented, "It's wild to me that people just accept sharing a room with a total stranger once they go to uni. That's not the norm here in New Zealand. You'd have to specifically go out of your way to find one." Hiya Bink Ranger commented, "It doesn't have to be a total stranger. People I knew from high school who both got into the same school shared a room pretty often if they were friends. After freshman year, during which staying in the dorms is often compulsory, if you want to stay in the dorms, you generally pick your roommate. You can also pay extra for a private room, and some people do. The trade-off is that dorms of that style have rooms that are big enough for a small couch and kind of feel like sharing a studio apartment. Meanwhile, some schools on the west coast of the US have student housing that are essentially just apartments, like 4 bedrooms to a small common area and bathroom. Off the top of my head, those schools are not only hard to get into, but ludicrously expensive compared to the sort of Midwestern state schools that does 2 to 4 people a room. Our next story is riding my butt and blasting your high beams when I'm going almost 10 over the speed limit. Enjoy going 25 and a 45. Earlier tonight around 10:30, me and my roommate were on the way back from McDonald's to grab a bite to take back home and relax while we watch our show. The road was basically empty, and since there was no one around, I was going around 55 miles per hour. Speed limit is 45 on this road. I was about halfway home when a massive decked-out lifted Dodge Ram turned into the road from behind me with his high beams and light bar pointed directly at me, practically flashbanging me. I thought he would turn them off after pulling in behind me, but after about 2 full minutes, his lights were still on full blast. And even though I was going 55, he's practically kissing my bumper, and he was genuinely starting to upset me. I sped up a bit to get some distance and then slowed down to around 25 miles per hour. And since this is a two-way road with only one lane per side and solid lines on both sides, he couldn't pass me. I spent about 7 to 8 minutes crawling down this road at a snail pace, and then when my turn was coming up, I fully stopped before slowly inching off the road with a truck blaring its horns at me. When I'm finally off, I see him take off at Mach Jesus and flip me off. Was it stupid? Yeah. Was it dangerous? Probably. Was it cathartic and funny as crap? Abso-freaking-lutely. Late night, 2-lane road, lifted Dodge Ram with extra bright high beams and light bar pointing directly at you. Honestly, I don't know if I would take the chance of trying to upset this guy. I think I would just, pull off to the nearest possible shoulder or something. All I know is the last thing I need is to try to agitate some lifted Dodge Ram driver. It would probably end up being one of those situations that after the fact of whatever went wrong, you find out they had a Florida license plate. Disastrous Panda 5530 commented, "One thing I never do when stuck behind someone driving slower than I'd like, and that's riding their butt, because I know it will absolutely only make them go slower." I know, because I've done the same thing. Dewey1234 added, "Yep, you gotta slow down because the vehicle behind now has no braking room, so you need to be much more gradual with your braking so they don't rear-end you. It gives you more reaction and braking time." Our next story is Arrogant Interviewee. A pretty senior global functional head role. After tracking him down, I set up a video call with a potential candidate. He was located in a different country but was the same nationality as me. After a pleasant enough opening 10 minutes, he started laying down the law. "I expect a significantly larger remuneration package, and I expect your client to pay for me to in full relocate, etc., etc." I decided this wasn't the person that was going to be moving forward for the role for which I was recruiting, not least because he had done zero research on my client, always a really bad sign. I wanted to show enough professional respect and stuck on the call for another 15 minutes. He took this opportunity to bury himself deeper into my bad books. He then rambled on about having back-to-back video calls all day and that he was glad I was his last call. It was then that I told him, "Look, you seem to be a pretty talented person, but I'm not taking you forward for this role. I have a number of equally well-qualified candidates who are taking this role more seriously, so I can't risk putting you in front of my client when your motivation seems to be focused on remuneration rather than an opportunity with a great company." He was crestfallen. I think he realized that he was cocky and had overplayed his hand and mucked it up. He started backtracking, trying to be a little bit more humble, but I pulled him up with my petty revenge. I said to him, "I can see what you're doing here and I understand, but it's too late at this point. Sorry. Also, if I'm your last call today, I certainly hope you at least had underpants on for all your previous calls." I went on to tell him that his camera was angled towards a mirror in his hotel room. Although he was wearing a business shirt which covered his backside, when he leaned forward, you could clearly see that he was wearing no underpants or trousers. He quickly apologized and disconnected, then emailed me another very groveling apology days later, which I graciously accepted. That was about a year ago, and I've not heard a thing from him since. I've never shared his name with anyone else. I would never do that. Nevertheless, I suspect he was a danged sight more humble after that call than when he started at. Arrogant Dumbo. Woke Britain left a comment that I agree heavily with. "Your motivation seems to be focused on remuneration rather than an opportunity with a great company. Hate to break this to you, especially given you appear to work in recruitment, but for most people, the entire purpose of working for someone else is the remuneration. Personally, I just gotta say, I think this hits the nail on the head. Most people are kind of in it for the pay and the benefits. Unless, let's be real, it's an absolute dream job, a dream company that they've been wanting to work for. In a situation along those lines, obviously people are going to be a lot less concerned, or at least a lot more flexible when it comes to negotiating things like remuneration. Our next story is, refuse to switch seats? I'll treat you to my melodious voice. So I was going home by bus, I should have taken the train by the way, one evening, and had the misfortune of finding a seat between two people. The way this bus was, one row has 2 seats, aisle, and the other row had 3 seats. I sat in the row between 2 people, and they recognized each other and started catching up. They went to uni together and hadn't seen each other and all. This was going to be at least a 45-minute drive, given the several stops and traffic. It was uncomfortable for me as they were talking across me and I just needed some quiet. I know, this is public transport and all, so I asked them if they'd like to switch seats, and they both refused. I put on my earphones and tried to shut them out, but I couldn't given that one party had stale breath. I was listening to a song and I decided to sing out loud. Loud enough that they couldn't get to hear each other. They stopped talking and I keep quiet. They started talking and I started singing again. Anytime they would talk, I would sing. It went on for a few minutes and then they stopped talking altogether and I had a smoother ride home. I didn't care if someone would record me. I was just too irritated. I literally don't understand this situation here. If they want to have this conversation, why would they not do the considerate thing and allow the person that's sandwiched between them to be able to be on the outside of that? You know what? I bet the stale breath was the problem. The one side probably caught a whiff of it and they're like, I want to keep a distance and let OP be the buffer for that breath stink. Button Temporary 8623 commented, I got on a plane abroad, 10-hour flight, and sat between a married couple and was initially concerned. And the husband, aisle, my preferred on long flights so I can walk whenever, said, "Want to switch with me?" We booked hoping/assuming it wouldn't be full and could have the whole row. I was so stunned I asked him twice if he was sure. I don't know what I did for karma, but I wish I did so I could do it again. This next story is a sign of the end. Okay, so this is my mother's petty revenge on some neighbors, and the situation is still ongoing. I'll update if anything interesting happens. Background: my parents live in the middle of our town, but their house is surrounded by about an acre of forest/wood. This part of the property has never been developed or anything. It's always been wild, and my parents like it that way. This is relevant. Their house is also at the top of a hill, and their property extends down the hill to where it flattens out. There's a street down the hill and a few of the houses there have backyards that face my parents' property. The issue has been one set of neighbors down the hill who have been a thorn to my parents for a few years now. Their favorite move has been to call bylaw on my family. They don't talk to my family first about the issues, they go straight to our city's bylaw. Once, because the previous owners of their house had illegally dumped a boat on my parents' property and my parents had to pay to remove it. And another time because there was a tree that had to be removed. I can't remember the exact reasons it had to be taken down, which cost my parents $5,000 to do so. Obviously, this has not endeared these people to my parents. Story: recently my parents found out that the neighbors had whippersnipped a swath of my parents' property. For reference, the neighbors have a fence around their property, so it's not like they accidentally went a little too far in the maintenance of their own property. This became the straw that broke the camel's back, or rather my parents' tolerance for their crap. After a quick check with bylaw, because they knew that the neighbors would be on the phone to them immediately, my parents bought a no trespassing sign, one that is the exact maximum size allowed by our city. The bright red monstrosity is 2 by 3 feet. My mother and brother went down the hill and installed it fully on my parents' property, facing the neighbor's backyard. So every time they're in their backyard or even look out the back, it's right there in all its pretty glory. Did I mention you can also see it from the road? I'm sure not only all of their neighbors and visitors can see it, but anyone walking or driving past can see it. My sister may have changed her daily dog walk path to go past it so she can laugh. We're all petty in my family. Within 24 hours of it going up, my parents received a letter from the neighbors, one that included a whole pile of excuses and deflection. The tree they forced to remove had made weeds grow, so they had to weed whack my parents' property. There was a gate in their fence, so they thought they were allowed to go on the property. They wish my parents had talked to them first about the issue. which made my mom angry laugh. It also included several things they had done on the property that my parents hadn't known about, which just annoyed my parents further, and was also stupid of them because they just admitted to destroying property and trespassing on a letter they signed and dated. The letter asked that my parents take the sign down. While my father, who can be a softie, was considering it, my mother said no, and she'll be the one dealing with them. She has no intention of taking the sign down, and legally she doesn't have to. So now we're just waiting for the neighbors to show up to talk, which we know they will as they mentioned it in their letter, and now they get to face my mother, who has what we call Dragon Lady mode, where she goes quiet, calm, and her anger is as cold as ice. The last time she was this annoyed with someone, it ended with that person being forced to resign from our local school board because of her. I hope I'm there when the neighbors find out that my mother is a petty, clever, vindictive dragon. I just think I would find it so exhausting that you live in a place that is surrounded by woods and forests and sounds rather remote, and yet here you are having to deal with a neighbor who keeps going on about bylaws and contacting anybody that can try to enforce things. It's like just as bad as living next to the person in the suburbs who's upset that you let your grass grow half an inch too long. Candyland Canada commented, Rule 1. Dad is not allowed to communicate with the neighbors in any way while unsupervised. Rule 2. Mom is not allowed to die before parents move from that property. Rule 3. If mom develops cognitive issues that may impair dragon mode, she must delegate authority over property to one of the children who has the dragon mode gene. No softies. Our next story is, guy gets out of his car to attack me physically, quickly changes his mind. I'm driving home today on a side street. I'm tootling along going the speed limit when a guy suddenly pulls in front of me from a parking space at the curb. Slow enough and recklessly enough where I almost hit him. He had no turn signal on. He seems lost, so I slow way down. He then proceeds in front of me very, very slowly, blocking the flow of traffic, weaving back and forth. He then starts to turn right, so I slow even more. Then he very abruptly veers in front of me wildly to the left, cutting me off completely, so I slam on my brakes and honk my horn once to warn him. This idiot stops his car literally sideways in the middle of the street, blocking me, blocking traffic in both directions. He then rolls down his window, starts flipping me off, and commences to scream at me. I just sit there in my car wondering if he's lost his mind. He then opens his car door, still screaming at me, still flipping me off, gets out of his car and starts to threaten me with beating me up. I'm a small woman. I calmly pick up my phone, do not roll down my window, my car doors are locked, and I simply and very obviously start recording him. He continues to march up to my car yelling at me. The minute he sees me recording him on my cell phone, he abruptly stops screaming. All at once, he becomes as meek as a mouse and then very politely and somewhat bizarrely attempts to explain himself. My window is still up, I'm still recording him. When I do not stop recording or put the phone down, do not react to him and do not say a word, he then turns on his heel, runs to his car, and drives off in the opposite direction like a bat out of heck. Funny how the threat of making a jerk go viral, possibly lose his job and expose him to the world as the jerk that he is, possibly a drunk jerk, almost immediately altered what could have been a police report and an assault into a frightened rabbit turning tail and running away terrified. Not sure if this is revenge, but it is pretty petty all the way around. Update: I went in today to file a report. Unfortunately, although you can clearly see him and his car on the video, you can't see his license plate. I only started filming when he started to get out of his car. As I noted, the car was stopped sideways about 10 feet ahead of me, perpendicular to mine, blocking me in. When he took off in the opposite direction from the direction I was facing. Not that I had any plans to chase him down. The police apologized and said there wasn't much they could do, as other than yelling, he didn't physically do anything to me or my car, but at least there's a record of his face and car should he pull this crap again. And no, I'm not posting the video up. The police assured me that posting the video might bring me more attention and trouble than I would want to deal with, and I'm normally a pretty private person. Sorry for the anticlimax, but hoping that after this, he might think twice before leaping out of his car and threatening to assault someone over his own stupid driving. Honestly, I'm surprised they hopped out of that car and were shocked that somebody was filming them. Honestly, in 2024, I feel like if you do just anything remotely quirky or weird or out of the norm, there's somebody that just immediately pulls out the phone. Another Redditor 3 commented, "I had someone do this to me a year or two ago. We just drove around him as he approached our truck. As we were going by, he kicked the door. Word of advice, do not kick a 5,500-pound vehicle moving at 10+ miles an hour. When we looked back at him as we drove past, he was laying in the middle of the road, clutching his leg." Nikon shooter PJS commented, "Please tell me you circled back and laughed in his face, because I absolutely would not have been able to resist doing that. One of my all-time favorite moments driving was when some jerk cut me off aggressively and started yapping at me before speeding away in a residential area. About maybe 2 miles down the road, I see he stopped and there's a cop behind him. I slowed down to a crawl, honked my horn, flipped him off, and laughed in his face. What a great day that was." Our next story is Deadpool Revenge. We went to see Deadpool 3, my wife and another couple. When there were about 20 or 30 minutes left of the movie, we could hear people talking outside the theater, and we thought the door must have been propped open somehow. I went over to check, and there were 4 employees holding the door open having a loud conversation. I was too skittish to do anything, so my wife went over and asked them to quiet down, to which they responded with an off glance, and when she sat back down, continued the conversation. In an immature response to their blatant disrespect for customers' cinema experience, our whole gang decided to empty the remains of our popcorn on the floor for them to clean up. Edit for those saying someone else had to clean it up. The employees were definitely the cleanup crew. They were standing there with brooms and dustpans waiting for the movie to end. I don't get how somebody going there and complaining about them talking literally over the movie didn't lead to them doing anything. I'm also kind of confused as to how you made it to the last 20 or 30 minutes of the movie and you still do have popcorn. I mean, you got back at them, but you just spilled the last remains of your $15 or $20 bucket of popcorn on the floor. Who truly won in the end? Survivor 0000 commented, "I don't understand this. If I've paid money to watch this movie, my question would be, which part of shut the freak up don't you understand? No way am I going to just sit back down and ignore it." This next story is phone calls for the previous owner, which turned out to be my crappy manager. Mobile phones became common in my country around 2004, just as I finished high school. My parents bought me my first phone, a second-hand Nokia. It was bulky and basic, but I promised myself that someday I would buy a new phone with my own money. When college started, I had a 2-hour daily commute. In high school, I had excelled academically and won several district-level awards. These awards were being distributed during my first year of college. One nationalized bank award finally gave me enough money for a new phone. I bought a Sony Ericsson K300i and a premium SIM card, not realizing it had been abandoned by its previous owner. By the third day, I started receiving calls for a guy named Bitsaw from various financial institutions. It turned out the number previously belonged to him, and for 20 years I've been getting these calls. Determined to keep my premium number, I began a routine of blocking wrong numbers. Back then, blocking was device specific, so each time I got a new phone, I had to start over, keeping a list of numbers to block. I got my first job after graduating in 2009. Around 2010, I was assigned to a new project with a notorious reputation for burning people out due to a nefarious project manager named Bits. I didn't know his full name for quite a while. He took pride in making our lives a living heck. Bits ruled with an iron fist. From the moment his team stepped into the office, they were met with a barrage of emails and messages, each more urgent than the last. Bits thrived on creating chaos, often changing project deadlines on a whim, demanding his team work late into the night and through weekends. Bits' presence loomed over every task. He insisted on micromanaging every detail, yet was quick to take credit for any successes, no matter how small. Failures, however, were met with his notorious tirades, publicly berating his team and assigning blame without hesitation. His unpredictable temper kept everyone on edge, afraid to make the slightest mistake. Meetings were another tool in his arsenal of torment. He scheduled them during lunch breaks and after hours, ensuring no one could escape his grasp. These meetings were often pointless, serving only to reinforce his dominance and disrupt any semblance of work-life balance his team might have had. His relentless stream of emails continued around the clock, each carrying a thinly veiled threat: perfection or dismissal. Under his reign, morale plummeted and burnout soared. Yet Bits remained oblivious, satisfied only by his complete and total control. I was quite ashamed when I learned that he was from the same area as I was and had gone to the same school, though years before me. In 2012, our company merged with a parent company. Almost nothing changed personnel-wise, but infrastructure-wise, we got MS Outlook and an organization view. That was when I first learned about Bits from an organizational hierarchy perspective. His full name was an eye-opener. It was Bitsaw. Now, the name was common enough, but at the time, mobile numbers had an area-specific pattern, so I already knew that the previous owner of my number was from the same area as me. Still, it could be someone else. I wanted to dig deeper. I talked with an old mentor who lived in the same area and had coached several high school students for the last 2 decades. He confirmed my suspicions. I won't go into the details, but it was evident that Bitsaw and Bits were the same person. I had been quite ticked with this unknown person named Bitsaw for almost a decade by then, and Bits had been the bane of my and several others' existence for quite some time. This is where the revenge lies. First, I unblocked all the numbers in my phone. I was getting 5 to 6 calls daily on average, but after unblocking about 150 numbers, it increased to 15 to 18. My answering strategy changed drastically. Instead of saying, "wrong number," I politely explained that the owner had changed his number and provided his current number to update their database. This is where I could be the jerk. I also volunteered his manager's number in case he tries something else. The fallout was epic. These people had been trying to find him for almost a decade. Banks sold his debts to companies that harass people for a living to get their money back. It turned out he'd been taking loans in everyone's names: his wife, parents, uncles, aunts, and giving everyone that same number. He was evading credit card debt and loans of upwards of $200,000, equivalent in USD, but it's a crapload of money where we're from. Apparently, he had almost 20 cases filed against him, but no one could find him. Probably why he thought he could walk on water. There are multiple versions of what had happened at the office when his manager started to get calls about him. He was let go 2 months later. Haven't heard from him since. Am I wrong to say that somebody like this was almost inevitably going to get burnt sooner or later? Like, yeah, he was feeling his oats and he had gotten away with it for a good amount of time, but it's almost inevitable when you owe that much money to different people in different circumstances. He's going to get found sooner or later, right? But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.